Okay, we are talking to Paul Di Filippo, and I'm going to give you the backstory, everybody. Um, Picture this. It's about 1986. I've got this paperback novel, and it's called Mirror Shades. There's actually a reflective print, tinfoil, whatever, on the lenses. You can see your reflection. And one of the stories, I think it was the first story, no, second story, it was Stone Lives, and it really impacted me. And I had to find out who this author was. It was Paul Di Filippo. And over the years, decades really, I've been reading Paul's work. And a couple months ago, I thought, you know what? It would be really cool if I did a cyberpunk miniseries. And what I wanted to do is go back to the stuff I loved, the stuff that influenced me from the 80s. So I approached Paul, and Paul, you were so generous enough to let me adapt your story. And while we are talking, I thought, maybe Paul would write a story for Vikings versus Samurai. So I pitched it to you, and you did. So that's why we're here today. So thank you so much. Oh my God, I just realized you have an immense library of books behind you.
That is not a simulated environment. That's the real thing. So that's a fraction of the books. I had to put some in storage recently, outgrowing the living space. But
You know,
see, I have a good friend who lives about 2 miles away, and he has literally 70,000 books in his. They fill a 4-car garage, so he's my baseline. As long as I don't exceed his insanity, I'm doing okay. Yeah.
I've never quite that many books, but what happened to
Yeah.
me is I've moved several times, and across country, especially, got
Yes.
so expensive that
Yeah.
cured me from buying books. I mean,
Yes.
not entirely, but now I have a Kindle, and that's my primary
Yeah.
reading device.
Yeah. Well, they're a pleasure and a burden. Something has to happen to them as we age. I don't have any, my wife and I don't have any kids, and I don't know if any nieces or nephews are going to be interested in the collection, but I'm enjoying the heck out of them still. I've been collecting since I was about 12 years old, and it's just par for the course by now.
Okay, we're straying from the interview, but that's okay because I'm going to ask a
Yeah, yeah.
question. Out of all
Yeah.
of these many books you have, is there one that you treasure above all others, and if so, why?
That's an excellent question. As a teenager, I had my favorite authors, and one was a fellow who was rediscovered in the 70s, a fantasy writer named James Branch Cabell. And he was a bestseller, like in the 1910s and 20s and even into the 30s. But he fell out of recognition until he became part of that famous Ballantine adult fantasy series, the series of paperbacks that brought so much great fantasy back into print. So I was hooked on this fellow Cabell, and my mom knew that. She was a big encourager of my reading. She was and is a huge reader herself. She's almost 92, still devouring books. And she bought me, I don't know where she found it because this was all pre-internet. She must have had to go, I don't know, to a local used bookstore or whatever, but I have an autographed copy, the original, first edition hardcover from this fellow James Branch Cabell. It's a book called The Silver Stallion, which was one of those titles reprinted, in the 70s by Ballantine. So anyhow, that book means a lot to me. I know right where it is on the shelf, so I can grab it when the fire alarm goes off and carry it out with my passport and ID and so forth. But it's books are treasures, especially, you can pick one up and instantly be back in time to where you read it, what your feelings were. And I'm not quite sure. I do read a lot of ebooks, mostly review copies these days because publishers are a little more parsimonious in terms of sending out actual physical hardcovers. So I do 3 book reviews a month, and it pops up on my Kindle instead of through the mail slot, and that's okay. But I just can't. I'm too old school. I just can't evoke the same feelings with an ebook. But they sure are handy as hell, and You can annotate and search and do some other wonderful stuff. So I can't knock anybody who loves ebooks either, just as long as you're reading.
All right, well, two things I'm going to respond to that. One, my favorite book, I still have it to this day. It's the Swords Trilogy by Michael Moorcock.
Oh
There was
yeah,
a bookstore in Hanover, because I'm from Massachusetts.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but I kept on walking through this bookstore over and over again. I was drawn to the cover. It was this guy wearing a conical helmet.
yeah,
He was holding this very voluptuous woman in his
yeah.
arms while riding a stallion. And eventually, I scraped enough money to read it, but it was Michael Moorcock, and I was just blown
Right,
away.
sure.
I would literally walk to school. This is junior high, reading
Yeah,
it for like a mile
yeah,
and a half, and
yeah,
then reading it back home. And I still have it. The
yeah,
spine's broken. I've had to tape it together many times. I still have it.
sure.
The things about ebooks, I don't know the stuff that you get sent, but I get sent PDFs, and I hate reading PDFs. If they just sent
Yeah,
it as an EPUB, that's a different
yep,
story.
right.
PDFs terrible to read.
Yep. Yep. The only good thing about PDFs is I can copy and paste from them. Like if I want to quote from a book in my review, it's handy to copy and paste a little easier with a PDF. But I have another book. I mean, I could tell you stories about so many of these, but one of my favorite writers is Samuel Delany, a name that might be familiar to you and some of your readers. And um I was a major Delaney fan from way back, when he was turning out. He wasn't back then a respected academic getting written up in the New Yorker magazine and everything. He was just another science fiction guy toiling in the vineyards of SF. And so I thought I had collected all of Delaney's books up to that moment in time. And then I was in this little kind of sleazy variety store, like you mentioned, and there was an area in back where they had stocked like the Playboys and some supposedly risque books of the time, which of course now look utterly innocent and banal. But I looked among the paperbacks, and there was a bright purple paperback. It had no image on it, the cover, just the title, and it was Tides of Lust by Samuel Delany, sitting there with all the softcore pornography and copies of Playboy and stuff. And I said, "What the heck is this?" It's not in the science fiction rack, but I knew, the author, and sure enough, it was the same Delaney, and I bought it and loved reading it, and it was so impressive to me that I said, this is like when I'm 17 or 18, I said, I'm going to write a book very similar to this someday. And then decades pass, and I did live the dream. I wrote a book that's kind of like an homage to Tides of Lust, and it's called A Mouthful of Tongues. And yeah, very, because Delaney's book was erotic in nature, and I said I got to do something like that. But then, just to make just the circle of life, just to cap things off, I had become friends with Delaney at this point. We were, now fellow professionals and stuff.
Wonderful.
And I got him to do a blurb. He's if you buy my book, you'll see a little recommendation from Chip Delaney on the back cover. So that was just like mind blowing. It's like, from 17 to whatever age, 47, 30 years pass, and the weird changes and lovely weird changes that can come about in your life just when you kind of put yourself out there and follow your passion. So that's so that the original Delaney paperback, which is worth quite a bit these days because it was the first edition. This sleazy purple paperback was the first edition of Tides of Lust, and so that's sitting on my shelf too after all these years, and I look at that fondly.
So, Mouthful of Tongues, is that the book where there's this woman living in a very cold, oppressive,
Mm,
fascist? That's the one,
yes,
right?
yeah, you know it. Oh, Joseph, I'm so honored. Thanks. Yeah, yeah,
Well, like I
that's
said, I've been reading your stuff for years.
yeah, yeah. So it should still be in print. I think it's still in print from Wildside Press. So I'm kind of proud of it. I think I did. I'm not as brilliant as Delaney, who was writing these masterful novels at age 17, but I think I did a fairly respectful homage to his stuff.
No, for sure. It's a great book. All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's get to the meat of the matter. So,
Yeah.
I pitched you. Well, no, I didn't pitch you, but I said, "Hey, would you write a story for Vikings versus
Uh,
Samurai?"
uh,
I gave you the constraints of 4 to 6 pages,
yes.
and you turned in this wonderful story. I might be butchering the pronunciation. Ægir and Shōjō Hoist.
Well, you're coming as close as I can get, based on never hearing anyone speak it, but just seeing those names and trying to sound out the pronunciations. But you didn't you had me at the word go there. You didn't have to twist my arm because I mean your concept, Vikings versus Samurais is an amazing, counterfactual concept, and I love alternate history and this canvas just seems so big and open to so many interpretations. And I hadn't, you sent me some samples, which was very illuminating. And my first impulse with something like this is always to kind of find a tack that is a little off the beaten path that maybe other folks aren't doing. So I said, let's have a little, humorous vignette with no sword play and just showing how these two disparate cultures interact when they're not actually hoping to kill each other. So anyhow, that was the story idea, and I'm so blown away by the artwork and the presentation is just amazing.
Well, all credit goes to Bugray in Istanbul. One of the things I really liked about your story, and I didn't realize until you turned it in, but it still has a conflict between the Vikings versus Samurai, but it's a
Yeah,
drinking contest.
right.
And but it was lighthearted. It was fun,
Yeah,
and actually, it was a much needed break because everything that was happening before, well, it
yeah,
was very pulpy and fun. It,
yeah,
it needed something enjoyable, something lighthearted.
yeah.
But where did the impulse go to involve a Viking and Japanese god of drinking and inebriation?
Well, I initially thought it's going to be a drinking contest between these two mortal characters. And then I said, my impulse is always like to layer a little extra value or subtext or whatever into a story. And I said, well, there are famous gods of inebriation. Bacchus is the one we all know. And I said, what if there was some hint that maybe these guys had been pulling the strings even a little bit and arranging this and now wanted to participate by watching over the contest. And I think, believe it or not, I think what was in the back of my mind, and I only just realized this recently, is Gru, the comic strip Mark Ivanier's Gru, because not the most recent miniseries, but the one before that featured all the gods of Gru's universe, and they were sitting up there in the clouds commenting on his doings, and I think that was in the back of my mind because I just read that about like 6 months ago or so. So to me, it's just if you can layer in, especially comics of famous, that term chicken fat. Do you know that from Mad Magazine? Yeah, yeah. So when sometimes a more modern term is eye kicks, but when Mad Magazine first began in the 50s, they had artists who were became so famous, and one of them was Will Elder, and you'd recognize his art in an instant because he was all over, the early issues of Mad Magazine. So being a nice Jewish boy, Will Elder said, chicken fat or schmaltz is like it has that connotation of richness and luxury and warm-hearted hospitality and stuff. So he would fill, if you ever look at a typical Will Elder page, it's like the canvas is so cluttered with these little jokes in the background, and he called it, that's the chicken fat of the comics. Like the main story is in the foreground, but in the background, like say it's a Superman parody or something, and the action of Superman and stuff is foregrounded, but then in the background you might have like Lois Lane kissing a picture of Bing Crosby or something. You know what I mean? Just a little eye kick that stimulates the reader, and they feel like they're getting more for their money. So that's always in the back of my mind when I do comics, is like, how do you layer in extra visuals or a little bit extra for the reader?
Yeah, I love it. Chicken fat. Let's bring it back. Now, this is not your first foray into reading comic books. We talked about this briefly. Maybe there's more to it than
Yeah.
this. But when we talked, I discovered that you had written a miniseries for Marvel Comics, Doc Samson, which is one of my
Yeah.
favorite B or C list level
Yeah.
characters.
Yeah.
Uh,
He's a great character.
so let's go into two things. One, tell us a little bit about this story. Three things. Tell us a little about that story.
Mhm.
How did that relationship with Marvel Comics begin, and what did that experience teach you?
Well, first of all, I'm trying to recreate it now. I think, I think it was actually Warren Ellis who got me that job, because we were having a correspondence at the time, and as I can recreate my rapidly shattering memories here, as I can look back, I really think that Warren had a hand in recommending me for that job. And he was at the apex of his reputation and powers back then, and so they said, "Yeah, sure. If you like this guy, we'll try him out." And unfortunately, it didn't really lead to. Well, I did. I'm trying to think. I thought I did one more little thing for Marvel, but in any case, it didn't really lead to a sustained career at Marvel. And you can see that they have Marvel has a tendency to try out prose writers and see if like they can be the next Neil Gaiman or whatever. Like for instance, Jonathan Lethem, he did a series for Marvel, and
I didn't
Caitlin.
know that.
Yeah, he did. Who the heck is? Once again, it's like a B or C list character that Lethem had been in love with for since he was a kid, and they let him do a miniseries. And the horror writer Caitlin Kiernan, she did something for them, and you can name about half a dozen other people, and they and I think and DC does this too, like Kevin Anderson, the space opera guy, the fellow who did the Dune sequels with Brian Herbert.
Right.
He did a series for DC, but it's like they give you your one audition, your one tryout, and it seems as if you're not instantly the next Neil Gaiman, then we'll move on to someone else. So that was a little disappointing in a way, because I thought, in the old days, you would get like they publishers, not just in comics but in books, would work to sustain or build an author, and they stick with you through like the lean initial years, and then eventually, with any luck, an author would acquire a larger following and stuff. But nowadays it's all so fast and temporary, and let's move on to the next flavor of the month. So that was a little lesson that I learned from comics that was slightly discouraging, but I had a ball doing it. In my comic, um the each individual, there were only like 5 issues, and each issue was supposed to be like a done in one problem. So there were like 5 different threats that Doc Samson had to face. But what he did in the first issue was he assembled like his team, and that was a lot of fun because I got to create 4 or 5 brand new characters that had never been in the Marvel universe before. Although I did resurrect one to become a member of the team. It was the living totem pole. He was the living totem pole was a character from like the pre-Silver Age Marvel. Like he was in like some horror comic from the 50s that like Jack Kirby did. And I think my editor, who was my editor then? I'm blanking on his name now. Mark Panacea, I think, was my editor. But in any case, Mark said, let's dig up like an old horror comic book character, because supernatural, and it'll add like a supernatural vibe to Doc Samson. And so we searched through some back issues and came up with the living totem pole, and that's just what he is. He looks like a wooden. He's kind of, I guess he might be related to Groot, because he's he's made out of wood just like Groot, and he has like 4 or 5 different faces that have different expressions up and down and stuff. So, that's the kind of fun thing you can do if you have an editor who's willing to indulge you and work with you and so on. So, and there was one, oh God, I'm blanking now. There was a guy who I think was a wizard. He came on the team too, and then there was a woman who was like, a tech genius and stuff. But it was fun to invent those characters and feel that I was adding just the tiniest tidbit to the Marvel universe.
Well, you brought back Totem Pole Man, or the Living Totem
Yes,
Pole.
living totem.
I went to my local comic book store to find it. Unfortunately, the way the economics are these days is a lot of comic book stores have to slim down. So I'm gonna have to find it online somewhere. So we're gonna
hopefully.
wrap this up. But before we
Yep.
go, you have a number of books. I have my favorites. I think my 2 favorites of yours. Mouthful of Tongues. Is it Mouthful or Mouth of Tongues? Mouthful of Tongues.
Mouthful of tongues.
That is, I believe what the young kids are saying these days, that's a very spicy novel. I really did enjoy it. But
or transgressive is the hip word.
Yes. But I'm really partial to Ribofunk and your steampunk trilogy.
Yeah, thank you so
especially
much.
since it's set in America.
Yeah.
So if you had to tell the listeners, the viewers,
Mhm.
to pick up one book of yours, what's the one book they should read?
Oh man, that's a tricky one. My newest novel is called Vanjie's Ghosts, and it sounds like a horror novel title, but it's pure science fiction. I was trying to be a little lateral thinking there, with that title that might not give everything away, but was evocative. So Vanjie's Ghosts is another counterfactual thing. It's a tale of the multiverse. It's about and it just came out in February, and it got some great reviews. And yeah, thanks, Joseph. And being the newest one, it's kind of foremost in my mind as like how I'm working these days and what kind of level of ability I have. And a friend of mine, like yourself, who's been reading my stuff for years, said, "Man, I think you really outdid yourself here." He thought it was among my better books. So, I love the old stuff. I've got, if readers of Vikings versus Samurai who love alternate history, I have a book called Lost Pages, which is a short story collection full of alternate histories. One of which Robert Heinlein is president of the United States, and Franz Kafka comes to America and takes on the role of Batman, and but so there's a lot of comic related stuff in that volume, Lost Pages. But folks, and also a lot of the older stuff is still in print, but Vanjie's Ghost should be, just as easy as anything to find too, because it's brand new.
I'm going to add it to the stack. Let me reach over the books here. Because Lost Ages, my memory's a little hazy, but wasn't like the first appearance of Spondulix? Is that the
nope, that's in another volume. But Lost Pages is the theme is that every protagonist in all the alternate histories is a writer I admired. And in fact, that volume has a story which had a hard time finding print, because talk about transgressive. A lot of editors thought I was insane to write this story, but my faith was preserved because Harlan Ellison, who was I wasn't as intimately close to him as many of his friends who mourn him to this day. People like David Gerald and other folks who just were like hanging out at his house and stuff. But nonetheless, we had a long distance connection, and we met several times and hung out. But Harlan loved this story so much, he thought it was like the best story I had written up to then. But it's called simply Anne, Anne. And the premise is, being a counterfactual story, it's an alternate life of Anne Frank. And, as soon as you use Anne Frank as a character in this somewhat irreverent counterfactual story, people like freak out. It's like, oh man, she's sacred, and you know, you're just some kind of irreverent slob writing about her. But I always tell people, I say, listen, in my story where I get to play God, like all authors, you know, we get to play God with the characters. I say in my story, Anne Frank goes on to live to be like 70 years old, so instead of dying as an adolescent horribly, you know. So I said, I think that far from being irreverent, I allotted her a better existence than the real creator did.
Is
So
that the one
anyway.
where she goes on to be like a movie star?
Yes, yeah, boy,
I
you what a
did read it.
memory, Joseph. Yeah, yeah. So Anne Frank comes to Hollywood, and if you read the diary, if you refresh your memory by reading the diary, she was besotted with Hollywood. She had up in the attic, she had pictures of you know, like Katharine Hepburn hanging up in the attic and stuff. So in my universe, she gets to escape World War II and come to Hollywood, and she basically assumes the career of Judy Garland. She she kind of she kind of edges out Judy Garland in this universe because she's got more talent and charisma than Judy does. So yeah, so that's a favorite story of mine that's found in Lost Pages.
All right. Well, Veggies Ghost, I'm going to read it. And you were so kind enough because during the conversation, I told you how much I like the story of Spondulix and if you ever did anything with it, but you did, you wrote a
I
book.
did.
So I haven't read it
I
yet because
expanded it.
it's my stack. And
Oh,
then
that's a
you sent
yeah.
me Ciphers.
Yes, Ciphers is a favorite of mine, but I hesitate to reread it because I think I could do it a lot better now. But I have wonderful memories of Ciphers. It was really a challenge to myself to do, like, to work at the top of my powers at the time. But there's one you need to hold on to Ciphers because it's just going to get more and more rare. It will never have a second edition, and here's why. Um, the book I probably shouldn't say this too loud, but I'll tell you. The book contains like 500 instances of unattributed lyrics.
Hmm.
No, you know what tight as is like ASCAP and BMI are. Like if you like Stephen King, for instance, famously, he wanted to have a couple of song quotes in one of his books, and he had to pay like $10,000 for like one
Whoa.
line of one song or whatever. So Ciphers is its subtitle is uh uh oh God, I'm blanking now, but it involves the subtitle involves the word rock and roll, and it's a totally pop culture influenced book. And so I said I'm going to embed famous and not so famous song lyrics into the text, you know, with that technique that like William Burroughs used, where he would insert, you know, found sentences into his text. And I think it works pretty well, but of course I didn't have, you know, $10,000 for one instance, never mind 500. So the person who published that, he said, listen, we're just going to go with it. And if anybody sues us, it'll be great publicity. And fortunately, the book had, you know, such a small printing. I don't know, maybe there's 1,000, 1,500 copies of it out there. And we got away with it until probably today when they'll come,
Cat's out of the bag.
they'll hear this broadcast and come after me. But it's not, you know, it's out of print, so maybe that'll save my bacon that it's no longer being sold except in the used book market. But that book I never dared. I actually had a small press that wanted to reprint it, and I said, listen, I got away with it once. I don't want to cause you a ton of headaches. So anyhow, hold on to Ciphers. It's only going to get more rare as the years go on.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading it after
Yeah,
Spondulix because that's kind of close
yeah,
to my heart. All right, so
yeah.
let's bring it home. If people want to keep up to date with you and what you're doing and all that, where's the best place to follow you online?
Well, my website is down at the moment. We got hacked and it hasn't been rebuilt. And I'm pretty active on Facebook. I do like you know, you can always reach me through Messenger, and I do like literally like 10 wacky crazy posts a day on Facebook to amuse myself and others. But what I'm kind of proud of is a website called Weird Universe, which I do with a co-blogger, and it's been running for, my God, I don't know, 15 maybe 20 years now. I'm blanking. And basically we each do a single post every day highlighting some bizarre circumstance or historical or current day oddity of life on this planet. So I have a lot of fun there, and you can always reach me through the website. And but Facebook mainly is probably a good way to keep, and I always post, like, whenever I have a new book appear, I always try to do a little small, modest, humble bragging on Facebook to let people know that it's out there. So in fact, you might have seen I posted reference to my Vikings versus Samurai comic on Facebook today. So
Not yet.
yeah,
I woke
yeah,
up. Go
I
ahead.
tagged you. I tagged not you, but the publishing page. So yeah, so let's all hang out on Facebook. I know it's an antique rendezvous now, but I think there's still people keeping it lively.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us, and
Oh,
thanks for
my
sharing your
pleasure.
story. And once we get Stone Lives into the
Oh
Cyberpunk
man,
miniseries, let's chat again.
that's going to be amazing. Thank you so much for all your support and creativity, Joseph.
Thank you.
All right.
All right.